So for nearly 2 years, I've been watching bombs dropping on Gaza, women and children in the front line being burned, losing limbs, even a pregnant woman decapitated because of a bomb, and the doctors are having to remove the baby and try and save its life. These are the sort of horrors that will come to define the 21st century. And on top of that, an entire nation is not only being genocided, it is being starved. And we've seen nothing like this since the Holocaust. And I just felt so helpless. I'd been on marches, I'd signed petitions, and my friends and I were saying, we have to do more because our world leaders are not doing anything at all. So a friend of mine who I'd been on a Viva Palestina convoy with back in 2010, he contacted me and said, we're going to launch a flotilla. And that's when I decided this will help me try and do something and take aid to the people of Gaza. So I said yes instantly, and obviously I ran it past my husband. But yes, so that's why I went. I wanted to save babies' lives. So I got to Tripoli and we travelled around Essaouira, Zintan, Zliten, lots of villages in the mountains, right down to Misrata, and the people were just amazing. My government said Libya is not a safe place to go, and yet pensioners were being arrested off the streets of London, and they said, don't go to Libya, it's not safe. Libya was brilliant. The people were superb. They all came together. That country is not in a civil war, and Gaza had united these wonderful people. They raised funds for special baby milk, baby powders, nutritious food. And it was all put onto this boat, the Omar Al-Mukhtar, and that boat couldn't have had a better name. You know, Omar Al-Mukhtar, before he was killed by the Italians, he said, never surrender, never give up. And that was basically the way that we all felt on the boat. There were 3 women, myself, another woman from Scotland, and a Muslim woman from Canada. And then there were 14 crew, all men from Libya. And they could all cook. Unlike me, I can't boil an egg. And, you know, we gelled together as a team and we really looked after each other. There was a great spirit of unity, and we were all on board for the same reason. We wanted to open up a humanitarian corridor from the Mediterranean Sea into the port of Gaza. And of course, I'd done this before in 2006 or 2007. I had been on the very first boats that had sailed into Gaza. And people say, you know, this siege has gone on since the early 2000s. That isn't true. When we sailed into Gaza, we were the first boat in more than 41 years to get into that port. This siege has been going on for decades, and the suffering of the Palestinian people, of course, has gone on since the Nakba. So, but it was really refreshing to be around like-minded people, and I came to know the Libyan culture through the whole experience. And today I told the Libyan ambassador in Jordan, who was there to meet us, you know, I wish I had a Libyan passport and not a British passport. The British passport is worthless, absolutely worthless. It means nothing to be a British citizen. I have written to my MP, who's written to the Foreign Office, and I have said, will you protect me? What will you do if I am taken? And of course, they can't do anything. We knew some hours before it happened that we were going to be boarded. We saw the Israeli boats. There were 2 or 3 of them that were coming towards us. We knew that the other boats in the summered flotilla had been boarded and had been taken by the Israelis. And these boats circled us, and they used a loud hailer and bright lights to say, you have a choice. You either go back to Tripoli and save your boat and the aid, or you stay here and we will seize the boat. So we had a meeting that night, and you know, the options were given. We've got 2 choices: either go or stay. And I said, we have a 3rd choice. And everybody said, what choice is that? And I said, we ignore them and go for Gaza, or we pretend to go and back to Libya and then rush to Gaza. And everybody was in agreement. And we had a brilliant captain and a brilliant crew, including a doctor. And so we decided to leave our position that night and look as though we're going away. But then we turned and went full speed for Gaza. Unfortunately, the Israelis stopped us and boarded us, and about 8 Israeli Marine commandos took control of the ship. They put the men in the cargo hold where all the aid was, and the 3 of us women were put back in our cabin. And I have to say, at that stage, the Israeli soldiers were unbearably nice. They tried to make conversation. We wouldn't. They came round with bottles of water every hour, saying, here's some water, here's a sandwich. And we said, take it away, give it to the people of Gaza. You're starving them. And so that's what happened when they boarded us. They stripped all the Palestinian flags and the Libyan flags, and they tried to take this photo. We had a big photograph of Dr. Hossam Abu Safia, who of course had been taken by the Israelis last year, and we called because we had an intensive care unit and we're a hospital support ship, we called this the Abu Safia deck in his name, in his honour. And the Israelis did their best to tear down this poster, but they couldn't. So it was good to see that he survived. And I hope that he survives in real life as well. So because the Israeli soldiers had been trying to be nice to us, we expected the same treatment in Ashdod port. What a mistake we made. As soon as they were processing people and we were sitting with other passengers from the other boats, and as soon as we stepped from the boat onto the port, this Israeli woman came up to me and she said, "Remove your hijab," or "remove your scarf." And it was a kafaya. And I said, "No, I'm a Muslim. This is part of who I am." And she said, "Remove it now." And I said, "No, if you don't like it, you remove it in front of all of these people so they can see what you're really like." And just then I felt this huge hand slap me on the back of the neck and push me with my arm up my back. And it was an Israeli soldier, and he pushed me down towards the port and ripped my hijab off. And then he took me into the entrance of this huge hall, which had been rapidly turned into some form of process, where we had to go through the whole process to get out at the other end. And what happened in that hall will haunt me for the rest of my life, because all I could think of is, my God, this is what the Nazis did to the men, women and children who were processed for the concentration camps. So there I was, without a hijab, taken into this vast hall with lots of noise and tension and screaming and shouting and people rushing backwards and forwards and all the Flotilla people protesting. And as soon as I stepped into the hall, this Israeli soldier said to me, "Remove your skirt." I was wearing a tartan skirt down to the floor, and I said, "But I'm not wearing anything underneath it." She said, "Remove it." And I said, "No." And then two of the Israeli men advanced forward. And I thought, my God, they're going to pull my skirt off. And she shouted again, "Remove your skirt." And rather than have these men touch me, I took off my skirt and I kicked it over to the floor and I said, "There, are you happy now?" And one of the senior officers shouted at her because she had no right to do this. And it was in front of everybody. And she picked my skirt up and she threw it at me and said, "Get dressed." So I pulled my skirt back on. And that really threw me. And then I was taken into a changing room and she said again, "Remove your skirt." And I said, "Why are you trying to humiliate me? You know, we're both women. Is there no sisterhood here? We're feminists." And she just said, "Remove your skirt." So again, I removed the skirt for no purpose other than to humiliate me. That's all they wanted to do, was humiliate me. Through the chaos, I saw a girl called Yasmin, who was one of the Flotilla leaders. And I saw her sitting, answering some questions, and then I heard her shout. And I looked in her direction and then saw and followed her eyesight. And there was Ben Gavir stalking around, just being pompous and smiling, and the red mist just descended on me. And I ran forward and shouted, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." But before I could get the whole sentence out, 5 men jumped on me. One grabbed me by the throat, another over my mouth, and another pulled my nose. And they pulled me back. And after that, I was put in handcuffs, metal handcuffs. Everybody else was in hand ties. And I had handcuffs, but they put them behind my back. And really ratcheted it up, and I've got some bruising from that. And the only good thing about that was that they then fast-tracked me through the whole maze of departments that we had to go through. And all the paperwork was paperwork. There was no computers, or nothing was done, and it was just so unpleasant. The worst process was when we had our bags searched, and they tipped my bag upside down and picked up a lipstick, threw it in the bin, picked up some makeup, threw it in the bin, picked up makeup. Everything started going into the bin. And I was saying, "Please, don't, these are valuable to me." And then they found a photograph of my daughter as a baby lying on a Palestinian kafaya. And they said, "What is this baby lying on this filth?" And I said, "That's my daughter, and this is a sentimental photograph." And he just picked it up, looked at it, scrunched it in his hands, threw it in the bin while still looking at me. They took my bracelets off, and there's a small diamond bracelet that they threw in the bin. They just wanted to destroy everything. And then they took my medicine, and started throwing it in the bin. And I said, don't do that. That's my medicine. I need that. It's my daily medicine. And they went, really? And just threw that in the bin. And then one of them picked up a prescription so that which had a list of all of my medicine. And I said, please leave the prescription and then I can give it to a doctor. And he said, you need this? And I said, yes. And he just scrunched it up in his hands and threw that in the bin. And if I expressed, please don't do that, I need that, that was in the bin. My driving license. They looked, what is this? And I said, it's my driving license. I need that when I get back to the UK. Oh, you need this? I said, yes. Really? And in the bin. One of my friends had an abalone shell from New Zealand, where she comes from, and it was in a box, and one of the women said to her, what's in this box? And she said, it's a gift, it's a souvenir, and it's very precious to me. It means, it has great sentimental value. And she took the lid off the box and she went, oh, she said, it's beautiful. And she showed her male colleague and said, look how beautiful this is. And he said, wow, that is I've never seen a shell like that before. She went, no, I haven't, and threw it in the bin. And you have to wonder the mentality of people who derive such pleasure out of being cruel and nasty. I'm still remembering things that belong to me that have just gone in the bin. My favourite pair of shoes, in the bin. My credit cards, in the bin. But I have a feeling that once the hall would be emptied, they'd all go back into the bin and take anything of value out. Our captain, who I was reunited with for the first time today, he was saying, I feel so sad, we lost the boat, we lost the aid, and we came so close to getting to Gaza. We were about 20 kilometers from Gaza. And I said, well, we have to look at what we did achieve. And I said, apparently the whole world has been up in arms about the flotilla, and the publicity has shone a light in Gaza. It's never been about us, it's been about Gaza. So I said, we have to take these small victories and move on. And I said, Nelson Mandela always said, never count your failures. Just remember how you picked yourself up and carried on, or what did you do after that. So yes, we have achieved a great deal. We launched the largest flotilla in the history of the Mediterranean, of peace activism. I've spoken to my husband, and he's saying people who didn't even know that I was going on a flotilla have been in touch with him, and they're all showing their support for Gaza, and they all know. And Israel has been exposed as a rogue state. They tried to get us to sign papers to say that we had entered Israel illegally. And I said, I'm not signing. I didn't enter Israel illegally. You kidnapped me. You took me hostage. It was an act of piracy. And people are seeing this because they're looking at the map and they saw that we didn't sail anywhere near Israel. We had never any intention of going near Israel. So yes, I think that the flotilla has achieved a lot. To the little girl in Gaza who was waiting by the beach, looking for a sign of sails of the flotilla and wanting chocolate, I'm sorry we failed you, my darling, but we are not going to give up. We will be back, inshallah. I'll have to have a very long conversation with my husband. Not that I need his permission, but yes, I want to do it again. My heartbeat is for Gaza, and I want to put a smile on that little girl's face and give her a bar of chocolate. So for her alone, yes, I will do it again. For the, I was going to say 2 million, probably 1.8 million people of Gaza, yes, I will do it again because I need to help.